Hi everyone. So today's or this week's lesson is on obesity, which is part of topic 2. So some of the causes of obesity include genetic factors. So some people do have genes that are associated directly with obesity, and it does mean that they do put on weight easier compared to other people that don't have those genes. There's also metabolic disorders that make differences in energy expenditure, and that could mean that people are more likely to lose weight or burn more energy or less likely. And there's also socioeconomic factors, so your education level, your food cost, and we're actually going to look at that later in the year. The main cause of obesity is actually lifestyle choices. So, genetic factors, metabolic disorders, and socioeconomic factors actually contribute to only a small portion, whereas lifestyle choices, where you eat too much food and you exercise too little, is the main cause of obesity. So you have an energy input that exceeds your energy output over a considerable time. That leads to adipose tissue buildup in the foot, and that leads to being overweight or obese. So food that is high in sugar or fat and low in fiber tends to be the cause of this obesity. And what we found is that with an increase in technology, there's a decreased amount of incidental exercise because kids are staying indoors in front of a computer screen or a TV screen, and they're not going out and playing outside. And that means that they're burning less energy, so their energy balance is always in the positive. Another possible cause of obesity is that there is greater consumption of alcohol. Alcohol actually has 29 kilojoules per gram, so you've actually got a lot of energy that you're consuming through alcohol. So food can also be consumed as an act of boredom or frustration, also stress eating as well. There are some genetic and environmental factors that do increase the likelihood of being obese. So if you have a one parent that is obese, there's 50% chance that you will be obese. And if a child has two parents that are obese, then their chance of being obese is actually 80%. So other causes of obesity is actually the body shape that you have, which means that you store fat in different areas. So if you're an android or an apple shape, this will lead to fat being deposited around the stomach and upper body, which is in the dangerous areas. And the pear or gynoid shape deposits fat around the hips, the thighs, and the belly. So, a recent projection actually suggests that by 2025, the prevalence of obesity and overweight will increase to 72%, with 34% of people being obese. Now, at the moment, 16.9 million Australians who are overweight or obese, or they project that by 25, that will be the number. Whereas in 2005, which isn't that long ago, there was only 10 million people that were obese. So if we look at the movement of being overweight or obese compared to 1985 to 2012, which when this was last collected, you can see that there is a steady increase, particularly in a really quite dramatic increase in the amount of people obese, and the amount of overweight people hasn't really increased significantly. But, we're looking here at almost 3 times as many people are now obese in 2012 compared to 1985, which is concerning. So this graph here is from 2014-15 census, looking at the prevalence of boys and girls in different age ranges, so the percent of the Australian population. So you can notice that in all areas, boys have a higher percentage of being overweight in comparison to girls. And you'll notice that with an increase in age for boys, there's an increase in the percent of overweight boys, with the largest increase or the largest percent being teenagers, whereas girls are a little bit different, so there's not that relationship there. But these should be both quite alarming graphs to have a look at. So if we have a look at the proportion of overweight and obese people, Australia has actually started to overtake other countries, which is not really all that good. Australia at the moment actually has 73% of its population, sorry, 63% of its population is overweight or obese, which is pretty concerning. So if we have a look at the population of men and women that are overweight or obese, you can see that We've got a steady percent of around 40% for men, whereas a lower percent for women in the different age groups. But what you'll notice is that overall we're looking at, over 60% of the population being either overweight or obese, which is really, really concerning. And if we have a look at in the last 30 years, we can see that the prevalence, particularly of um, people that are overweight and obese, has changed as well. We're actually seeing an increase in obese people, particularly in females, whereas in males, we are seeing what would be a steady hold, but and the number of males that are obese have also increased as well. So there are a whole bunch of causes of obesity. So childhood obesity is to do with child behaviors, which could be a dietary intake, physical activity, and sedentary behaviors. Then you've got your parenting styles and your family characteristics that include foods that are available in the home, nutritional knowledge of the parents, so do they know how to eat healthy, the parents' dietary intake themselves, encouragement of activity, so going out into the yard and playing. So what you'll find is that these days the yard has become a lot smaller. So all these new property developments have tiny, tiny yards because we're seeing this shift away from playing outside to playing indoors. So houses are bigger, but the yards are smaller. So kids don't have anywhere to actually play if they were to go outside either. Anyway. So you've also got parents' activity behaviors or patterns, monitoring TV hours, so don't spend all your time in front of the TV because if you're sitting on your butt, you're not doing anything and you're not burning a lot of calories or kilojoules. And the parents' weight status, which I've already talked about. And then you've got community and demographic factors, so ethnicity, school lunch programs, work demands, accessibility of recreational facilities. Do you have a park nearby that you can go to? Do you have a swimming center that you can go and exercise at? The accessibility of foods and restaurants. So, do you have good access to fast food? Do you have access to fresh fruit and veg? Neighborhood safety, the school PE program. Do they have any programs in place that encourages kids to be exercising every day? And then your socioeconomic status. So there are a plethora of consequences of obesity. Type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, types of cancer, gallbladder disease, kidney disease, arthritis, gout, and complications in surgery and quality of life as well, because you just can't move around in the same way that a person that is healthy can. So, some of the psychological or social concerns of being overweight or obese include poor self image, feeling neglected or excluded from normal activities because you can't participate, exclusion from physical activity as well, um, and it's assumed that all obese people are unhappy or disadvantaged. So there's less choice for clothing and it's often more expensive. There's also job discrimination and reduced job prospects because if you were to look at someone that is obese, you might think, well, can they actually carry out the job that I want them to? So I won't go through these. You can have a look at the PowerPoint if you're interested in these, but I'm just going to go through them. They explain themselves. So looking at treatment for obesity, the success rate of treatment for obesity is quite low. So results after 1 year tend to be disappointing. And what often happens is that within 3 to 5 years, people often gain extra weight. So they don't actually build any of their habits. So it's not about dieting, it's about building good long-term habits. So often success or failure will depend on the difference between energy intake and energy expenditure. So is there a significant difference? And how long can the diet be maintained? And I think diet gets a bad rap because diet implies that you're only going to diet for a certain amount of time. Whereas really, when you're trying to treat obesity or even prevent it, you should just be eating a certain way, which is a healthy lifestyle, rather than just going on a diet for 6 months because I want to lose 3 kilos. So the more restrictive the diet is, the higher chance of failure. And this is why when you decide that you do want to eat healthier, that you want to change some of your lifestyle choices, it's really important that you don't cut everything out in the beginning, because if you do, you're more like your diet's going to fail. If you cut out all delicious food that you like to eat, whether it be fast food or sweets or chocolate, you just don't have the self-control. A lot of people will then cave and actually binge and end up losing weight. Sorry, gaining weight. So cutting one thing out at a time is going to be a better way to do that. So the preferred diet, or in my case, I would just say the way to eat healthy is to eat variety of foods with plenty of fruit, vegetables, and whole grains. We're actually going to do an assignment based around the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating when we start looking at topic 3 that talks about what is a healthy diet or a healthy um, attitude to have around food. So, some of the other ways that you can prevent obesity and being overweight is exercise. So, increasing your exercise will actually increase your basal metabolic rate. And what that, because you're building more muscle. When you exercise, you break down muscle, it rebuilds stronger. And that means that muscle requires energy, and therefore that's part of your BMR. So, you'll have a higher BMI in general. So I often jokingly say that I exercise to eat. And that's one of the reasons is that I like to exercise so that I have a higher BMR so that I don't have to be as restrictive with my diet because can have a higher energy intake. So moderate exercise does not lead to an increase in food intake. So it doesn't mean that if you exercise more, you're going to be hungrier and you're going to eat more food. What I actually find is that my eating habits haven't really changed despite doing a lot of exercise, and I'm sure some of you probably would have felt the same. And increased fitness may actually lead to a positive self-image that may actually want you to lose more weight or to maintain your body image. So you can also try behavior therapy, where it actually analyzes the social and psychological behavior and changes the pattern of eating. So don't eat when you're bored. Don't eat when you're upset. Everyone would have seen that girl in the movies where she gets dumped and she just takes out a whole tub of ice cream and she starts eating that. That's a bad behavior that needs to be changed. And hopefully that will then change habits, which is how you lose weight, because it's all about habit changing. It takes about 20 days to break and form a new habit, or well, 20 days to form a new habit after breaking a bad one. And the problem why it's so hard to break habits is because those habits are introduced at a young age. And, you know, once you start those habits, and that's why it's really important that you build in new habits when you are a child. So that's your parents' responsibility because it's very, you have to be very disciplined to be able to break a habit or form new habits. So there are also weight loss groups that help for mutual support, and they share good practices. If you can share with people the same, they can relate to you because they have the same goals as you. They understand where you're coming from, and they just understand, which also will help if you are struggling because they are probably struggling as well. So it does work for some people if they attend the group. If you're part of a weight loss group but you don't attend well or you only attend sporadically, it's probably not going to work. So there are medical intervention that you can do. The first one you probably would have heard of is lap banding, where it reduces the size of the stomach so the person can't eat any more than a cup of food without feeling full. It is very expensive and dangerous and can lead to vitamin deficiencies as really only as a last resort. And there's also cosmetic fat surgery, so liposuction. But again, that's very excessive. So there's other medical methods, including jaw wiring, which is also very expensive and dangerous and sounds pretty horrible if you ask me. And it doesn't actually change any behaviors because you just can't physically eat the food because your jaw's wide shut. Appetite suppressants tend not to work in the long run, can also be addictive and can lead to vitamin deficiencies. And any type of fasting will lose weight in the short term, but you won't change any of the habits. And it's really, as I've said already, it's all about changing those habits. So when it comes to obesity, really, it's all about energy balance, making sure that your intake and your energy expenditure is about the same. It's if your energy balance is greater than one, you'll lose weight. If it's less than one, if it's greater than one, you'll gain weight. And if it's less than one, you will lose weight. That is the cure to obesity. Eat less, exercise more. And you're probably wondering why we don't choose to do this. And it is all about choice. And some people just don't have the discipline to do so. So moving on to part two, we are going to look at different diagnostic tools that you can use to measure and evaluate your diet and health. So there's BMI, hip to waist ratio, waist circumference, weight to height tables, recommended daily intakes, and glycemic index. So I've already talked about BMI, and that's your body mass index. It's a table. We don't use BMI for children because it differs by age and it's not very reliable. If we were to look at Miss America and BMI, you'll notice that there's actually been a decrease in BMI as we've increased in time to the recent or 2000. So BMI is the advantage of it is it's very easy to manage or measure, and it's suitable for a large scale survey. The disadvantage is it doesn't take into account muscle mass. It also doesn't account for women's body shapes. We carry weight in our breasts that do not take into consideration uh, that. So that doesn't is not taken into consideration. It also doesn't take into consideration women that are under 18 or people with a high muscle mass. So the hip to weight ratio is an effective way to see whether is measured around the waist and the hips to look at the widest point and then the difference between the two and whether you have a health risk. It's very easy to measure, and the advantage is that all you need is a tape measure. It's good for a snapshot of whether you are healthy or unhealthy, and it is very inexpensive. However, it does not take people's body shapes into account. So sometimes the location of the tape measure on your body can be incorrect, which could then lead to misleading data. It can't tell the difference between adipose tissue and fat-free mass. So if you happen to go to the gym and do lots of squats and you've got a large booty and you've got a small waist, it's not going to take that into consideration. Or if you so you do weightlifting, so it doesn't really take that into consideration. And it's also not very accurate for pregnant women. So waist circumference is just the measurement of the waist, and then basing on that measurement, you can identify whether you are considered to be healthy, overweight, or obese. And then you've got the different levels for that. So because abdominal body fat poses a greater health risk, that's why waist circumference is used, and that abdominal body fat is increased your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and breast cancer. The problem is that some shapes are more common in men compared to women, and the storing of fat is different. So if you are a pear shape, you will share, your weight will be stored below the waist, whereas if you're an apple shape, all of your weight is stored around the waist. So while the waist circumference might be simple, it is incorrect if not measured properly and doesn't take body shape into consideration. So another diagnostic tool is the weight for height tables, and they determine the ideal weight for your height. Again, it's very similar to BMI, but it's no calculations are needed, and it's very simple to calculate and does tell you whether you have got a risk, and it's quite inexpensive. The advantage is that it's limited because you don't have to calculate body fat. Many athletes may be much heavier than the recommendations due to the increase, and it's not an accurate measurement. I just realized that that's actually advantages and disadvantages are the same. So the advantages for that would be that it doesn't take any specialist equipment. It gives a snapshot that's very easy to look at, but then the disadvantages are these ones here, and I'll update the PowerPoint. So you can use an underwater weighing technique that, because body fat provides buoyancy, that less so than a lean person. And the last one that I'm going to look at is the skin fold technique. So that's just looking at subcutaneous fat on different parts of the body and then using the caliper to work out whether you're at risk or not. So body fat is a risk factor for chronic diseases like heart disease and some cancers, and it can be assessment of fitness for athletes and others. And the last one is glycemic index. Now, this isn't really a diagnostic tool, but more so a rule to follow. If you eat foods that have a low GI, you're going to be less likely to gain weight over a long period of time.